maybe just a minute or so. And then we're going to take each one big idea and come back and kick it around among the five of us. So why don't we start out with Tori?
Oh,
Tori,
thank you
one
very
big
much.
idea.
Morning, everyone. Great to see you. I want to say first that 8 years goes very, very quickly if you're lucky enough to come back each time. It's an extraordinary experience. You know, you have a profound effect on your constituents and the lives of the people in the state. And it's just an awesome experience. But I think what I want to say for my comment about what an idea that I didn't know, and that is that most bills ought not to pass.
Oh.
That took me a whole 2 sessions, 2 years to learn.
That's a profound thought. We'll come back and kick that one around in a minute. Mike Thibodeau. Mr. President, Mike, you there? I think you're on mute.
Unmute, there.
There you go.
And I just said something very profound and you missed it, Roger. You know, I appreciate being asked to be part of this morning, and I'm going to say something that's going to shock absolutely nobody. I don't envy a single individual that's got to go and face the challenges that you all are going to face as elected officials in this upcoming legislature. Unprecedented times, some enormous challenges, and I know that by working together and working hard and studying it, you're going to make lemonade out of lemons. And but it's going to take all of you. And I think probably on a lighter note, probably the one thing that I wished I'd have known when I first was elected to the legislature was that little blue plate that they gave me, I actually had to pay for. What a shock that was. I went to the State House to pick up my plate thinking I had a free registration coming, and instead Matt Dunlap wanted a check for $15, and that was pretty shocking, but at the same time it was sobering. This is truly public service in the purest of forms, and whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you're there for the right reason if you ran for the state legislature to make $10,000 a year. And I'd encourage each and every one of you to remember that about one another. Nobody's there for the wrong reason. They're all bringing different life experiences, and it's important to recognize that, Roger. So, I don't want to take up everybody's time, but this is going to be an interesting discussion. I expect I'll learn far more than I'll have to, share. And so I'll look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Mike. And by the way, if you do put your blue plates on or your red plates, some of us don't because we're not great drivers, but just remember, don't speed and don't go cut people off at the rotary.
Well, the best advice I can give anybody is in my case, I put it on my wife's vehicle so that she could drive around. She's a good driver and uses her blinkers and stuff, and I never got any complaints that way.
Thanks, Mike. Joyce Maker.
Good morning, everyone, and I also would like to offer my congratulations to everyone. This is the beginning of a new experience for all of you, and some of you not so much because you've been there, but it's a great experience. And I the thing that really got me the most is that people treat you like superstars. You're not a superstar. I never thought I was a superstar, but I just would caution you to be very careful because they have you on a pedestal, and they really believe everything you tell them. So you got to be very, very careful on what you say. And I always try to say to them, they would say Senator Maker or Representative Maker, and I'd say, no, I'm Joyce. I'm just like you. You need to put yourself on their level, because once you put yourself up, sometimes it's hard to come back down. So that's one thing I learned, and I learned it right from the beginning, which was really, really good for me because I think it could have been different. So I think you've got to be cautious It's just exciting when you walk in there, and you probably won't for a little while, but I know you all have walked in and saw your name up on the list. And it's just overwhelming for someone from a small area like Calais, Maine, and to see your name there. It's pretty exciting, but you got to not let it get to your head, because once it gets to your head, I'm afraid you can go in different directions than what you really intend to do. So that would be one piece of advice, is to make sure that you level yourself and make sure you stay on the same level no matter where you go.
Thanks, Joyce. And Craig Hickman.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Roger, for inviting me today. Congratulations to all of you. I still remember raising my right hand and taking the oath of office and just weeping. It is an enormous responsibility and a privilege to know that you're going to be the voice and the vote of the people who entrusted you with the privilege to be there on their behalf. And so that in and of itself I still pinch myself. Seeing the name former in front of state representative will take some getting used to after 8 years, which, as Tori said, goes by amazingly quickly if you decide to serve that long and the people send you back that many times. I mean, I think for me, the one thing that surprised me, given that we are lawmakers there to create policy, was that reading is fundamental, and fundamentally, there are too many folks who don't read. And I know they can read, they just don't. And, you know, some people think I'm really smart. I'm not, I just read. And how did you know that? I read the bill. So don't only rely on summaries of bills, and don't only rely on lobby tells you is in the bill, or don't even sometimes rely on what your own caucus tells you is in a bill, because we make mistakes. Sometimes we're covering an amendment to something that's already been passed. So read the law like a lawyer, and do your homework, because I find that when you do that, you're going to be much more able to explain the policy, find the kinks. I mean, some of you may have heard that we passed a bill without a comma in the wrong place or the right place, and it caused the whole bill to be different than what was intended. So do your due diligence and read. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. I'd like to offer one of my own, and that is something that I think all of us know just from our own lives, but when you get in the legislature, it's particularly important that your word is your bond. And so as a practical matter, sometimes, you know, be careful about committing to your support or opposition to a particular bill too early before you know all the facts. Because people are going to be looking to you for commitments. Colleagues will, other people in the other chamber will on their bills, lobbyists will, and just be careful, because once you make that commitment, it's tough to back out. And I think that those of us who served all got frustrated at one time or another by some colleagues who said, don't worry, you've got my vote on this. And then all of a sudden, when you look up at the lights above you, it didn't turn out that way. Doesn't mean you can't change your mind, but if you do, get back to the person who you committed to and say, look, I know I said I was going to support you on this one. I can't do it now. I'll explain to you why I can't do it. But as in, if you're in business or you're in the law or whatever life field you're in, your word is your bond, and it's particularly important in the legislature. So let's go back now and kick around each one of those ideas a little bit more. Tori, you said something really interesting, which was that most bills shouldn't pass. Could you explain a little bit more what you mean, and then let's get reaction from the other panelists.
Well, look at how many bills there are in a session. You know, there's over 2,000 bills. Can you imagine adding 2,000 new laws to our state every 2 years? And I want to go a little further on this and say that, you know, sometimes ego becomes so involved in, you know, you feel it's your bill, and you start feeling like it just absolutely has to pass. And so you show up and introduce your bill and try and get people behind it. But then I found a lot of people never came back. The sponsors of the bill never came back to the committee to hear the committee's discussion, the Committee of Jurisdictions discussion on your bill. And they know, the committee knows a lot more about the history of bills and policy in that area. And it would behoove you to not only introduce the bill, come during the public hearing, but also to come during the work session and hear why the committee may not pass your bill.
Thanks, Tori. Other members of the panel want to comment on that?
Well, I'll jump in, Roger. I mean, I think Tori's right. So many of the bills are stuff that we saw, back in our first terms. And it was vetted then and probably wasn't the best idea at that point. And sometimes things change over time and sometimes they don't. I think there's another aspect of that. And, I mean, Tori touched on, how committed and how we are just, when that bill becomes yours, you're oftentimes it just becomes your ultimate goal and objective is to get it passed. And, I look back and I'm probably not the only one that has this problem. After you serve your time at the State House in Augusta, you look back at your time, and I don't get up every morning and say, boy, didn't I pass some really, really important bills. As a matter of fact, I'd be pressed to tell you, more than one or two of them that I actually, sponsored and passed over the 12 years I served there. The fact of the matter is that isn't what you think about after your service is done. You think about, relationships you had, how people used you, how you used others. That's probably more important to you after you finish your service at the State House than any policy bill that you were involved in. Maybe I'm unique in that fashion, but that's the way I've found it in my retirement years of being at the State House.
Thanks, Mike. Anybody else on that? I remember when I first started serving, one of my very conservative Republican colleagues said, if you vote no 100% of the time, you'll be right 90% of the time. Maybe that's true.
I would just like to add, Roger, is that they say, and you'll hear it too, I know, during this session, for every bill you pass, then you need to kill a bill. That's in law right now. And I think there may be some truth to that. I don't think we ever did it, but we heard it, and I'm sure you're going to hear it as well. There are some really good bills, and I sometimes wonder if the thing should change so that everybody can't submit a bill because every bill gets submitted. There needs to be a tougher way to judge these bills as they're coming in. And I think sometimes the council is not the way, but in other ways, I think it is. So you have way too many bills for the time you're there to give it the thought that you should and to be able to pass it correctly. So I do agree with Tori.
Yeah, we're unique among many other states in that every bill that gets introduced has a right to get a public hearing and to go through the process. That's not true a lot of places. People have always talked about it as a real strength of Maine legislature, but in some ways, maybe it holds us back from giving the time we need to consider other bills. Let me move on.
I'll just add.
Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, I'm a fan of all of the bills getting a public hearing in the first session anyway. I mean, I think when you have a citizen legislature, there is a learning curve where some bills are redundant. Yes, some bills have already been passed in the past. The committee will tell you that. As Tori said, you'll know that, well, we've already done this and here are the results and thank you. But I also think that some bills don't pass sometimes because people know going in that they're actually sponsoring a bill title to get a policy conversation started. And I think that's also an important role for a legislator to be able to use their voice and their vote on behalf of their constituents. We get a lot of constituent requests to put certain bills in that we may not even support ourselves. And that may get you in trouble, but at the same time, you're doing it on behalf of the people you represent. And so to get a conversation started around a piece of policy that the legislature or the budget process may not be ready for, you can come back around in your second term or your third term and put the same title in and maybe get the result that you believe you need. So most bills don't pass because they're just not ready for prime time. But I don't think there's a reason why the legislature should change how it assesses that in the first regular session anyway.
Thanks, Craig. Mike, let me turn to you. You're one big thought, and I know we talked a couple of days ago about this, about relationships with other legislators and how you don't have to give up any of your core principles or necessarily moderate your positions in order to be a good colleague. Could you talk about that a little bit more and what makes a good colleague?
Well, that's assuming that I even know what it is to be a good colleague. I'm sure, as time goes by, everybody has a different opinion of your service, but this is how I see the world. The legislature is no different than your everyday life. The way you use your neighbor, the way you use the guy that you at the garage that repairs your car. If you have a personality or if you go in with a really sour personality and aren't willing to listen to other people, if you aren't kind to them, that tends to have an adverse effect on people and what they think of you. I said I had an opportunity to speak to the incoming legislature when I was Senate President on my way out. And one of the lines that I'll never forget that I used was this: kindness is not weakness. You can have heartfelt beliefs. You don't have to give up principles that you believe in, but you also don't have to be mean-spirited in the way you interact with other people. There are people on this Zoom meeting right now. My guess is I'm probably have the most conservative ideas. They're formed from, life experiences. Everybody on this Zoom meeting has different life experiences, and that brings them to the place where they, find these principles that they live by. It doesn't mean mine are absolutely right and yours are absolutely wrong. It means that's my life experiences. And I brought that to the State House with me, just like Joyce did, or Craig did, or Roger did, or anybody else. And they used that. But this is probably one of the things that I learned the most. I shouldn't say this, but Senator Cates was a terrific example of how to conduct himself. Okay, he might have not agreed with you on the issue, but he was always straightforward, direct, but kind in his interactions. And I hope that's how people remember my time there. I said earlier on the Zoom meeting, I don't get out of bed in the morning and think about all the bills I passed. I think about the relationships I had and, how people used me and how I used them. Them are the most important, some of the most important things that we can do. If you want to be successful, if you want to get your bill passed, it's a whole lot easier to vote for somebody's bill that you actually like. And we're all human beings. We like to be treated kindly.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks for those kind words. Other people on the panel want to expound on that or expand on that?
I just want to go back and reiterate something that you said, Roger, and that is about the MDF tours. Once those get started again, do not miss any of them. I made more friendships. I learned a lot, but I made more friendships on those tours of people I might not have met. They weren't on my committee. They didn't sit near me in the House. I just didn't have occasion to interact with them, but they're wonderful for friendships. And I really left after 8 years, as I know the rest of you did, with incredible friendships all over the state that I'll have for life.
For sure. Other thoughts on this subject?
Yeah, I think that relationships are essential in all aspects of our life. We can't do anything alone. And if passing good public policy is your goal, then reaching not just across the aisle, but across the chambers to develop trustworthy relationships with people. I would often sit in on committee hearings where I didn't even have a bill in, and people would ask, why are you here? Because the relationship to the process is just as important as relationship to the people. If you want a bill to pass, it's got to go to the House, the Senate, and get by the governor. So make relationships with staff members of the governor's office, because at every step of the way, you might need to rely on a relationship literally to move something forward by a vote or by a non-signature or by a non-veto, I suppose I should say. So the relationships with people who have different opinions and ideologies and parties, but also come from different committees and different chambers and different branches of government. Relationships with members of the executive branch are just as important as relationships with your fellow lawmakers. So just keep that in mind as you go about your business, and by all means have fun. We don't need to take ourselves that seriously all the time. And somebody else probably has a better idea than you anyway, so you don't have to be so married to your own success. But remember to have fun, because it is a place where we work, but we also have to make sure that we relax into it and smile all the time. So
Yep. Thanks, Craig. And you may be thinking, where am I going to find the time to build these relationships with legislators? We're so busy with committee hearings and our constituents and all. And if you really look at it when you're there, there's actually a fair amount of dead time. Even during sessions of the House or sessions of the Senate, there are breaks, and it's a perfect opportunity to take 5 minutes and walk across the chamber and introduce yourself to someone you don't know yet, or during lunch to try to make sure you're eating with different people, not the same little group all the time. Let's go back to Joyce's one big idea, which I think I would summarize as be humble. Joyce, anything else you want to say about that? And do others have thoughts about that?
Well, I really believe it's very easy to get your head blown up because you are important to where you're from. So humble is the word. It is, you have to be humble. And I don't know any more to say about it except that to be careful, because it's I've seen legislators that they keep swelling because they're on the news, they're quoted in the paper, and it's so easy to become a star. And I guess the most important thing to me when I was going through the whole process are the children. And they keep you up there on, they can't wait to come to the House or the Senate to see where you sit, and that excites you because, I'm a big one for our children. So it really, you just got to be careful. You got to be very careful. That's all I would say.
Thanks, Joyce. Others? Let me approach it a little bit differently. I completely agree with what Joyce said. I think one of the great things about being in office is the opportunity you have to bring joy and happiness to your constituents on occasion. I don't know if any of you have ever received a legislative sentiment or had a member of your family receive one, but it's a big deal. And when you show up as a state representative or state senator and to an Eagle Scout ceremony, or to an award ceremony, or to someone who's just turned 90 years old to their birthday party, you have an opportunity to really to make that event something special, and use that power in a good way, because when the state senator from your district shows up at something, it makes it a bigger deal. And when the state representative shows up, it makes it a bigger deal. And so do that. But going back to Joyce's point, keep in mind that it's your office and not you. I had the same phenomenon when I was mayor of Augusta. I could go and do that and make an organization feel better about itself. I remember talking to Senator Angus King once about it, and asked him about his experience as governor. He said, "Yeah, I felt the same way." He said, "But never forget that it's you because you're the mayor. It's not you, Roger Cates. It's you because you're the mayor. And don't just keep that in mind. There's a mayor before you, there's going to be a mayor after you. You are privileged to hold that seat right now. And someone once told me, you wait, when you get out of the legislature, the next day, all of a sudden, you're not going to be quite as good looking or quite as smart as you were before. And that was very good advice, and that's really true.
I'll just add that, I agree that humility ought to be a part of public service, period. But for those who are driven by ego and ambition, I say, if you want to be a star, play to the constituencies that sent you there, not necessarily to all the people that you work with. Because, like Roger said, when you make them feel good, when you make a difference in their lives, when you show them that you care enough to show up at a funeral or at a hockey game or to deliver a sentiment, then, if you're driven by ego, they're going to tell you you're the best thing in the world. So play to them and make them happy and serve them, and you will have no trouble getting elected or re-elected if that is what you choose to do.
And I agree with you, Craig. I really think it's important, and I don't mean to say that you shouldn't do some of the things. You need to be present. Everybody kept saying to me, you're everywhere. Where, I think it's important to be everywhere, but don't let it go to your head. That was my whole point. I think you're right, Craig, is that you need to recognize the people in your area. I mean, some people had never been recognized when I did it. And I showed up at funerals, I showed up at weddings, I showed up at places that I didn't really have time to do when I was an elected, but it's important because they want to see you there. So I think you're right, Craig. That's probably the important message, is that you do it for your constituents, not for yourself.
I heard rumors that President Thibodeau used to show up at weddings where he wasn't even invited, but maybe that's just urban myth.
Just yours, Roger.
Right. Right. Let's move on to Craig. And Craig, I think your theme was read, and in a larger sense, do your homework. You want to expand on that a little bit?
It's important to be prepared and to know all the nuances of a bill that not only has your name on it, but came out of your committee or is going to, I never voted on a single thing that I didn't read some aspect of the bill. Now, committees might do a report out that is unanimous, which means everybody on the committee agreed to the content of the bill. It could be a simple amendment to something. It could be a technical bill. It could actually be a major piece of policy tucked into something that looks like a technical bill. And so even though those bills would go under the gavel, which means no one is taking a vote on them, I would still read them before that happened, so that if I caught something that didn't seem right, then I could say something about it and maybe ask for that bill to be tabled until we could look at it a little bit further. Because despite everyone's eyes on the bills throughout these processes, we still can miss something. And there have been some bills that I had to pull off of the consent calendar over time because I knew they conflicted with some other aspect of law. Now, the reviser will catch that when the bills are being finally added and updated to the statutes. And so then the legislature can correct those conflicts with either new bills or in the errors and inconsistencies bill that the Judiciary Committee does every term. But why wait all that time and go through that process if we as lawmakers catch something because we have done our due diligence and read as much as we can and burn the midnight oil? And I'm a researcher. I like to read, and I try to encourage that with all of you because, every word matters. And you got to know what you're voting for. So I can say after 12 years, I've only taken one vote that went against my conscience, and I didn't sleep very well, so I never did that again. But I never voted on something that I didn't read, even the bill summary. You've got to read it so you know what you're doing. And if people ask you about it in your community, then you can say that you've got a little bit of knowledge about it.
Thanks, Craig. Other comments about being prepared and doing your homework?
One of the ones that I had added that I sent to you, and maybe they'll remember this a little bit more, but it's Dr. Seuss. The more you read, the more things you know, the more you learn, the more places you'll go. And so I totally agree with you.
Roger, I guess I'd jump in and say that on top of trying to know the issues and read as much as you can, inevitably, every caucus has one person that has to speak to every issue. They feel as though they Their opinion is got to be heard. And so every morning when you caucus, that individual is going to have a lot to say. Don't be that person. Be the person that your caucus recognizes. If you have something to say, it's worth listening to. So many people want to be heard, and they haven't taken the time to know the issue. If you want to be taken serious by your own caucus, by other people in the building, have your word be your bond, but be shackled by the truth, and know what you're talking about when you speak.
Yeah, Mike, you really reminded me of something, and I think that's really true about choosing your spots to speak, whether it's in caucus or on the floor as well. I remember my father was in the state senate for many years when I was growing up, and I paid close attention to who was kind of the leaders, if you will. And he asked me one day, who do you think are the most effective people in the Senate? And I named 2 or 3 names. And back then, the legislative transcripts of the sessions were in these huge books, volumes like this thick. And I mentioned Joe Sewell, and I mentioned Harry Richardson. And he turned to the back of the index and showed me where each one of those people had spoken. And neither one of them had spoken on a huge number of bills on the floor of the Senate. But when they did speak, people listened. And Mike's right, if people speak to every issue, they just will get tuned out. And you may miss some important things that they'll say, but you'll just tune them out. Let me throw out a question to, well, I'll come back let me throw out a question to everybody, and that is the learning the process, learning the Mason's rules, learning the parliamentary procedure of the chamber. Is this something which only leaders need pay attention to, or is it important for every single member to really learn that craft of parliamentary process within the chambers?
Yes, the short answer is everyone should become familiar with the processes of decorum and of tabling motions and what overrides what. You don't learn all that in one fell swoop, though. And asking questions then becomes extremely important. Like, what did they just do? What was that motion? Why did we not do that first? There's really not a question as a lawmaker that's too stupid to ask, especially when it comes to procedure. So there are books that will explain it to you. There are online apps that you can read, but when you're in it is when it's happening, and that's when you have to pay attention. So you might need those rules someday to advance a cause or to stop something that you just don't want to see happen. And only leadership should not be the ones to know all of the rules. So figure that out and put those tools in your toolbox and use them sparingly and as necessary.
Mike, let me ask you to comment on that if you could.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Roger, the first thing I'd like to say is, boy, I never learned all the rules.
I think you just froze in place. Mike, did we lose you? We'll come back to Mike. I think, Tori, were you about to say something, or Joyce?
No, I was going to say something back with the don't be that person who speaks on everything.
Go ahead.
I co-chaired the education committee, and Joyce was on that committee. That's how we got to be friends. What you have in the education committee is a lot of people who come in and think they know better. And that's because they went to school. I wouldn't think that I know about energy policy because I use electricity. And we have so many bills that come into the education committee, it's ridiculous. And I find that people just don't listen to why we think it's not a good idea, or why we think it's a good idea, but it's not a practical idea. remember, schools have not grown by a single minute during the day, nor a single day during the year. And yet every year people want to stuff more things into the curriculum, which just isn't possible unless you take some things out. And so I think that, you know, we saw over and over again, and Joyce will tell you this, people wanting to stuff more things in and then get mad because we didn't feel, you know, we're trying to protect the teachers. And although it's a good idea, it's just not a practical one.
Thanks. Mike, we
Yes.
lost you in mid-thought there. You want to come back and talk about that?
I'm not sure where you lost me, but you know, we talked a little bit. We were talking about the rules, and it doesn't matter. You know, nobody knows all the rules, and you know, the book that governs our chambers is so thick that nobody could possibly know what they are. But know the basics, understand what they are, so you can follow along and know what's going on in the chamber. I think that's important. Here's another, you know, little bit of insight that folks that have served there a very long time apparently didn't even catch on to, and that's that your presiding officers really have no idea how long something's going to take. We get to the end of the session, and I can remember walking down the hall, and if I didn't get asked 5 times, I didn't get asked once. People will inevitably come up to the presiding officers and say, "How long is this going to take?" The truth of the matter is, I had no idea. You know, I would ask the secretary how long it would take before we get a bill back from the House, and she didn't have any idea. So a lot of this is truly magic in some ways. Your presiding officers are trying to figure it out as well. So, you know, if a lot of times I'd fake it and just throw a number out there, but the truth is, nobody really knows how long some of this takes. We've got some people that are working incredibly hard.
We lost you again. Okay, let me throw one other thing for people's discussion. One thing which I was so impressed with when I came to the legislature and learned over time is the incredible assets that are available to you to help you do your work. We've already talked about MDF and their seminars and their publications, but maybe my colleagues could talk a little bit about other sources of help, whether it's legislative aids or the revisor's office or NCSL or Council of State Governments, things which you just can't get to as public citizens, as private citizens, but they're absolutely there to help you with your legislative duties. Anybody want to talk about that?
I'm a fan of the law library on the 2nd floor.
I was going to say the same thing, Craig.
Chamber. I'm a bookworm, but that place, the staff in there is awesome. Like, you can ask them to research anything and they'll get back to you within hours. And they do a very exhaustive search for, when was the last time, has state government ever done this? Have we ever passed a bill where the legislature overruled an action of the executive branch? And by the end of the day, you've got 6 or 7 or 10 where that is the case. So that's my favorite place to resource extra, shall we say, legal history, to know that what we're doing has a context. And that probably is available to the public, but I'm not exactly sure enough lawmakers use it. So I encourage people to get to know the staff in that room very intimately.
That's great advice. I remember the first few times I did that, I felt like I was imposing, but no, they want to help you. That's why they're there, and that's why they hold the jobs they have. They want to help you do a better job. Tori?
Yeah, I was going to say the law library as well, Craig, because, you know, your great idea that you think is just, you just came up with, it's marvelous. You can go to the law library and see how many times that idea has already been put in and what happened to the bill. So it's a very important thing to go and research your great ideas.
Let me mention 2 organizations which the legislature actually pays a fair amount of money to join, but huge resources for you. One is the National Council of State Legislatures, NCSL, and the other is the Council of State Governments, called CSG. And these are national organizations that keep track of what's going on in all 50 legislatures around the country. So if you have an idea for a particular bill, and I had one which was death with dignity as an example, you can call your contact there and say, can you check and see what's gone on nationally in the other 49 state legislatures with this issue, and put me in touch with people who have fought the battle, so to speak, in other places. And that's what they're there for. That's what they get paid to do. And they're very, very bright people, very hardworking, and they'll be a tremendous source for you for help on what you want to try to get accomplished. Others on that? Well, I think we're almost at 9, and we agreed that we would leave the last portion of this session for questions or comments that you have. And so why don't we turn things back to Julie, who's going to lead us through that portion of the agenda. Julie?
Thanks, Roger. Yeah, I would like to switch to Q&A now. And just a reminder for what I said at the beginning, we would like to do this in as orderly a way as possible. So if you would like to ask a question, go to the bottom of your screen. So the toolbar, or actually it could be at the top, but the toolbar, and click on participants. And then you'll see a hand icon like this at the bottom, and you just click on that, and I will be monitoring the gallery here to see who would like to ask a question. So with that, we can open it up. And if by some chance I don't notice you, then feel free to, say something.
But I saw just a question that came on chat about those two organizations. National Council of State Legislatures, all you really need to remember is NCSL, and Council of State Governments, CSG. And your legislative aides will be very familiar with both of those.
Chip Curry has a question.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for the wisdom. This has really been wonderful. So my question is, are there common time traps or rabbit holes that you find have not been very helpful for you, and when you just get sucked into an area that isn't helping you as a legislator or helping your constituents? Things to watch out to avoid.
Who wants to take that?
I'll take part of that. I found that when I first came in, I spent too much time being mad. I was mad at I couldn't believe it. What? I can't believe they put that in. I can't believe they said that. I had to calm myself down and say, concentrate on education. That's what your area is of expertise. Just concentrate on that, and leave the other areas to the people who are experts in those areas, and not worry about other people can take care of other areas. You concentrate on education. So it worked out much better, because it takes a lot of energy to be annoyed all the time.
Other thoughts on that?
I think another thing that takes a lot of time away from what you're doing is lobbyists. I think it's important that we need to have them, but I think that they're important for the issue at hand. You can get caught up in that a lot. I think if you need information, I always ask for them for what they had for information, but you have to be careful. It would take up a lot of your time.
Chip, the only other thing I'd say is that, boy, if there's one skill which is absolutely critical to have as a legislator, and I don't think I ever mastered it, it's time management. And you've got your constituent work, you've got your committee work, you've got your, maybe if you have another job, you've got to pay attention to that on nights and weekends. You've got your family, you've got your physical health, your mental health, and trying to figure out how to balance everything. If anybody can write the textbook on that, they're a genius, and they will do you better service than any of this will. Time management is just critical.
I think I'll just follow up on what Joyce said about, she keeps saying, be careful. And I'm hearing that in a different way, especially when she talked about lobbyists, because sometimes lawmakers do take into consideration that they've disappointed a lobbyist on an issue. And the next thing you know, they're doing everything that that lobbyist asks them to do. So definitely don't go down that rabbit hole ever, because then you'll lose your mind and your soul and your conscience. And that's back to the lobbyists, but they're actually there to get you to do something, either vote for or against something, and not always to impart accurate information. So be careful of that. And to what Tori said is, if you can find a focus so that you are the go-to person on an issue, or that people in both chambers of both parties consider you an expert on something, then by all means make sure that you're an expert on that thing that people are going to come to you about, because then you increase your chances of collaborating on all things, and you're going to have a better outcome for the things that you want to get done.
Thanks.
I
Okay,
would just
Lou?
like to add on to what you said, Roger. To me, overall is your family. Time management is important and you need to recognize that. But if something happens with your family, they're number one and should always be. So just that, needed to add that.
Thanks.
Tori,
Yeah, I want to add to that a little bit, Joyce, what Joyce just said. My husband died while I was a legislator. And I want to say that both sides of the aisle and the entire House supported me unbelievably during that time. It was really, it's so clear that that's part of your family.
Mike, were you about to say something?
oh, I was, but it wasn't that important, Roger. So, but time management is a tough issue. Tori touched on something that was important, which is, don't spend your entire time mad at somebody. One of the hardest things, and Joyce, I was thinking about it when Joyce had mentioned, be humble. One of the hardest things about serving at the State House is that it often becomes a pressure cooker, and you find yourself in tough situations. Be that person that's willing to recognize we're not always right, and once in a while we have to go back and apologize to somebody. I can't tell you how many times I've had to go back after thinking about what I'd said or done, and tell that individual, hey, sorry I did that. That wasn't right. Be that person that's willing to do that.
Yeah, I always made the same pledge about 6 weeks out from the end of every session as that pressure cooker really begins, and tried to pledge that I was not going to say anything that I would later regret. Not sure it always worked out that way, but it's a noble goal at least.
I was never successful at getting through an entire legislative session where I didn't find myself regretting what I'd said or done. So.
You also have to remember, though, to be true to your range of emotions. I mean, it's a pressure cooker and it's full of disappointments. I mean, every bill that you think should pass that doesn't, it's a loss. And you just have to be honest with yourself about how you feel. Not like Corey said, so that you just stay mad all of the time, but you still have to process some of those small losses, because they do pile up and they will pile up, and you've got to be resilient and keep your head up and then go back to work. So make sure that you are true to your feelings and don't act like you don't feel how you feel.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be very critical for this session. It's going to be very hard this session, because most of the bills, you're going to watch so many bills go all the way through to appropriations and then not be funded. There's just not going to be the money this year, and it's going to be very difficult, because you put your little heart and soul into getting it through, the committee and then the House and then the Senate, and then watch it die on the appropriations table.
I know Brad had sent a chat. It's now off the screen, but he wanted to talk a little bit more about staff. But there's a lot of really, really bright people in that building. Most of them are not legislators, by the way, but your legislative staff are very, very bright folks, who many of whom have been there for a while. Take advantage of them. They're there to help you. The people in the revisor's office are brilliant lawyers, most of them. The folks who are the legislative analysts on the various committees know their subjects inside and out. And again, their sole role is to help you do a better job. So please take advantage of them. One other thing I want to say quickly, because I just wanted to get in before we ended, and it's something that Craig had said earlier, and that is to be a good listener and to listen to people of various backgrounds. I just want to, Craig makes me think of that. We served on the marijuana committee together, and Craig was a constant voice for trying to change the name of it from marijuana to cannabis. And he wanted to put in things that recognized that people of color had been affected more historically by our marijuana laws than others had. And I would always find myself sighing to myself and saying, Craig, that's fine, but it's really not important to this bill we're doing. We got to get to the nuts and bolts. We got to get it out. We got to get it out. And frankly, I found myself sometimes being frustrated by him while that process was going on. And it's only later, in looking back on it, that I realized I should have been a better listener to a point of view that I just didn't have at the time. And it came to mind this fall with the whole Black Lives Matter movement and the shootings and the police reform movements. And I realized that I had learned a great deal from Craig, and that my own views of how I look at things now were very much colored by the things he was saying in that committee room when I was sighing to myself and saying, gee, I really wish we'd just get on with the specific bill. So be a good listener and listen to people who have perspectives very different than yours. So I just wanted to say that. Next question, Julie.
Yeah, Scott Survey.
Scott, I think you might be on mute.
Yeah.
There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, I just wanted to mention about bill signing day and also that just be careful about what you do sign on. I think that sometimes they do sign on just to follow the bill, but just, you know, my biggest advice, and I heard it from Senator Paul Davis when I first walked in, when I started, is he says, don't sign anything unless you really want your name to be there, because he says you can really, you know, it can go bad for you if you're not careful. So just be careful about signing on to bills that are not what you really stand for. So I guess just, you don't have to be on every bill. So that's, and maybe Roger, you can touch base on the bill signing day. That should be coming up soon, and how that works.
Thanks, Scott. Anybody else want to talk about that bill signing day?
I think Scott is absolutely right, because, you know, everybody says, well, it doesn't really matter. You know, they just need enough signatures in order to get it in, and it doesn't hurt, but it does hurt. So you want to, I can remember when I was a freshman, I signed on to a bill because I was told, well, it doesn't really matter. And I got a call from the president of the Senate at that time, who was from Washington County. And he said, Joyce, did you sign on to this particular bill? And I went, well, yeah, because it's just allowing them to hear the bill. And he said, this is a bill against Washington County. And I was shocked, you know, and so I had to do one of those walkbacks and say, you know, I'm really sorry I signed the bill, but I can't support it, you know, because I didn't really realize what the bill actually did. So just be careful of that. I think that's an important part, Scott, for bringing that up.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. And the only other thing I'd add is it doesn't do you much good to get 10 members of your own caucus to sign on as the co-sponsors, because if your colleagues look at a bill and it's all Democratic sponsors or it's all Republican sponsors, that kind of sends a message in and of itself. So to the extent you can get bipartisan and by-chamber signatures, that really helps, I think. Julie?
Chip Curry.
I don't think I have a question. Oh, I'm sorry, my hand. You have to physically bring your hand down.
Yes.
Here, let me lower my hand.
I'll do that for Scott as well. Okay, anybody else? While I'm waiting for hands to pop up, I just want to point out that I put in the chat a link to SurveyMonkey for a quick survey. Should only take a few minutes.
Can I say something if we're waiting for a new question?
Sure.
Be prepared to learn something about yourself. I really went in thinking I was a bleeding heart liberal. I know we say progressive now, but in my day it was liberal. And I walked out knowing I was actually a moderate. And it's a very interesting growing experience, but you'll learn a lot about yourself.
And I will say to that, as well as to what Roger said, and thank you, is that you be prepared to be uncomfortable with what you learn about other people. I mean, I've always said that I'm the voice for those who cry in the dark. I think we all are, and the voices in the dark that we are representing are different. Sometimes they're the same, but sometimes they're very different. I don't know what it's like to say be, a poor white person from rural Maine that lives on a dirt floor. But I certainly have some common experience around that, but I don't know those stories. Those are not my stories. And so if someone is there representing those voices and has something to say that we need to hear, it might make us uncomfortable. We need to hear it, because down the road, life will show us that what we learned that struck us in a way that made us go, oh, I don't want to hear it anymore, is actually something that is profoundly relevant to all of us. So be prepared to learn about yourself and be prepared to be uncomfortable.
Thanks, Craig. Julie, before we have another question, maybe I could ask the panelists to comment on constituent service work and how to be able to effectively do it. Ideas?
I left your house phone. I left my house phone connected because I put that phone for all constituents. And I found that very helpful to me because they left messages. I could think before I called them back. They didn't interrupt me in inconvenient times when I couldn't listen.
Others?
It's probably, without a doubt, Roger, the most important part of anybody's job, being at the State House and representing the community. Make no mistake, folks don't know what you're voting on down there. Very few people have time to study it out and understand your bills, but they know, and the community will know if you're involved and you're answering your calls and trying to chase down things that are important to them. So
I think I'm sorry, Mike, will you finish?
no, I was just going to say the folks there at the State House, your legislative aides are, are terrific at helping you, but you've got to put some initiative in it yourself. Don't depend on them to do everything for you. Get involved, be part of figuring things out.
And I want to second that. I had some wonderful aides, absolutely wonderful aides. And I don't know what I would have done without some of them, but I had some not so good aides. And so I think, Mike's right. You got to be prepared to do your work. And I thank God I left my home phone on my listing. I did it. Somehow my husband started giving my cell phone out, which didn't work out well. I would recommend that you don't do that. Because everybody wants your phone number. So just be careful about doing that. And I got some really strange calls, but I think he was helpful. Your spouse is very helpful in getting messages to you as well. Not as a routine, but as some, but I, like Tori, left the House Republican phone for them to get back to me, or just the legislative phone. And it works, but it's very important that you get back to your legislator. Don't get back to your constituents as soon as possible. They'll let you know, and they'll let others know that you haven't. So make sure you make that a priority.
Yeah, when I said house phone, I meant landline.
Brad mentioned something. I was looking at the chats and he's right. We talked a little bit about legislative staff. I just want to read his comment, and it's really true. Treat your legislative aides. He says, treat them with respect. They aren't there to run your errands.
Right.
Treat them like your teammates. And that's really, really true. And I must say that that's something which not all 186 members of the legislature necessarily honor. So they're good people. They're working very, very hard, and their job is to make you look good. and they do.
Yes, they,
Will Tool has a question too.
Will,
Thank you all, and thank you all for doing this. It's good to hear from each of you today. Something that you all might want to weigh in on is how you see this new technology affecting relationships and how the legislature will be doing its work for the foreseeable future.
thanks for the question, Will. Thoughts?
I think it's going to be challenging. I only hope, and this is just from me, that our representatives and our senators won't stay home, that they will go to Augusta and that they will attend their meetings like they usually do. And if they have to wear a mask, they have to wear a mask. But you'll have interactions between your counterparts. I just think it's so important that you're there together. And you may not be able to meet as a group because of COVID, but I think it's a way of connection. And I do like the fact that what I've heard is that people like me from Calais can call in and testify. I think that is a great thing. But when I testify, I want to see the committee members there. I don't want them home in their house, because you tend to go and do your things, or you put you on video. You can't do that if you're in a committee room, because you're all on video. I hope that the legislature will not do that, will not allow people to go home and do it from their home. That's just my personal point of view. It's too easy. They need to be in Augusta. That's what we elected them to do. I just feel that that's very important. So in answer to your question, Will, I think this can work. It's during a bad time. I'm hoping with the vaccine, we'll be able to see some differences, but I think it's too relaxing if you're allowed to stay home. Just my opinion.
Thanks, Joyce. Other thoughts? I just say, I think you all have a huge challenge on this particular issue, because again, this is all about relationships, and relationships get built on casual conversations in the corridor, and for those of us who are a little older, they get made by shaking people's hands and sometimes even hugging people. And that kind of casual interaction is just I found was so important in the 8 years that I was there. You're going to have to look for new and unique ways to recreate that in a more virtual world. And you'll be writing the textbook on how to do that when you're done, I suspect.
Roger, Joe Rafferty has a question now.
Yes, please. Go ahead, Joe. We can't hear you. You on mute?
No, it's
Try
his
this.
connection.
Can you hear me
with
now?
audio.
Yes. Well, I think you're,
Okay. All right. First of all, well, thank you. And I had two questions. One was much like Will's, and that the relationship piece that is, to me, is going to be a struggle to build. It was a struggle being in contact with constituents throughout the campaign. And again, Joyce just commented about going to the State House, and I hope we're able to do so. I'm not sure that we'll start that way, but I find it very challenging to work virtually. Number one, my skill level is not that great, but I just, I think if you're sitting with people, you can read people a little bit easier face to face than you can do virtually. But I find now a lot of your advice was getting out, and I feel my strength is going to be, face to face and working, seeing constituents and attending all those things that right now don't exist. I mean, I'm in York County right now. We're in code yellow. There's nothing going on at schools. I mean, churches, everything is so limited right now. So again, any advice in terms of building relationships in this, I hope it's not a new world, but it's a new time for certain. And then the last thing, I was sworn in last Wednesday. I'm a true rookie in every phase. I'm sitting here about a week and a half away from cloture date, and I don't have a specific bill that I would, want to submit currently. I'm not sure, I don't necessarily, I won't say that I won't, but I didn't come in with one, and I felt like people were saying it's almost like I should have. I don't know what's going on here on my computer.
Thanks. Well, let me ask the panel to react to both of those things.
I'll go to the second question first. You don't have to put a bill in. It's not required. Being a lawmaker isn't just about making law. It's about being a part of the lawmaking process. And so if right this moment you don't have, if it don't fit, don't force it. If you don't have anything that you want to do, don't worry about it. There are ways to put in bills after cloture. They do need a vote of the Legislative Council, but say a constituent comes to you with an issue that you find out about 3 weeks from now that's really important for you to sponsor, you can put the request in and hopefully make the argument to the Legislative Council to let the bill go through. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. On the issue of relationships, our black mirrors, these things that we are in front of now all the time, are antisocial. And like you said, you can't read people. When you're not in the room, the energy isn't there. You don't feel them, you don't see them. And that really is important for building. And so I don't know what the solution is. We got to work with making sure we mitigate transmission of this virus. I like talking on the phone when I like having Zoom calls. I guess in some ways you can hear the tone of people's voices a little bit better when it's only their voice disembodied from the screen. So I'm old school that way. I don't like to text. I like to talk on the phone. And I think that might be a skill that we've lost as well, because people are constantly text messaging each other with very long threads and conversations. So I would just suggest that the phone is your friend right now and not necessarily the black mirror.
And Craig just mentioned something. This is off track, Joe, from your question, but he mentioned texting. And just beware of social media. I mean, from everything you read in the newspaper now, that probably is something that doesn't even need to be said. But you are a public figure now. So when you post things and you repost things, it's almost like putting those in the newspaper in terms of their impact. So just be very careful about pressing that send button or reposting something that doesn't really reflect how you feel as a person.
Your way has another question.
Could I just add to Joe's concern? I've been Zooming a lot, and I absolutely agree with him. It's really hard to read people when you're Zooming, and you can't really tell. The only reason why I would say that you would go to Augusta is that you still, I assume, will have to have meetings of the House and the Senate. And at that time, to take an opportunity to pick somebody up across the aisle and say, how about lunch? You still can do that. I mean, there's still places open to be able to do that. And as long as you are careful and follow the guidelines of COVID, you still can make connections. Don't give up on that. At least with my Zoom meetings, we're not meeting at all. And I'm on the trustees of community college. And it's really hard to tell what's really going on because all you're doing is talking to people and you're not meeting. And if you're meeting in Augusta, you can talk to each other still. So that would be my only suggestion regarding that. So you've got to somehow keep the interaction between you going. And with your constituents, if you go to the store, I have cut my store time down from being a legislator to 2 or 3 hours to about 15 minutes because I have a list. But at least if you're going in the store, you can say hi to people with your mask on and at least let them know you're around. So.
Thanks, Joyce.
Thank you.
You bet,
And
Joe.
Joe, there's no requirement that you have to put a bill in. And believe me, there'll be people there that will put 20 bills in and make up for all the people that aren't putting bills in. And really, I don't think there's going to be the money for most bills to actually become law anyway.
Julie, do we have
Thank you.
time for one more? Is there another question?
Yeah, I had called on Scott, so if he could go next.
Scott?
Yes, well, can you hear me or?
Sure.
Okay. Just the big question I have, and it's something that's we're all going to have to deal with, is during committees, we're going to listen to each bill and they're going to have speeches on the for or against, or neither for nor against, and there's going to be a pile of speeches. And if you do it on Zoom, we're going to have some way to keep track of all the written speeches. And I don't know, I'm just reaching out to maybe Yellow or Roger or even Mike, how we can put those maybe in an amendment on some type of attachment to each bill to keep track of them rather than having them all on emails and having them all over the place. I think it's going to be a challenge for all of us to keep track of all those attachments or something to the bill. So what's your thoughts on that?
Any thoughts, ladies and gentlemen?
I don't see there would be any difference. I would same requirements that if you're going to speak before a committee, you would have to submit your letter ahead of time for the committee's review. And they would be getting them to you. I don't know whether they're going to do it by email or how they're going to do it, but you'll have them ahead of time. And any amendments, I sure would hope that it wouldn't be on Zoom, that it would be done with the amendments would be made in your committee room.
Well, they're doing most of the committee work on Zoom and having only like 2 sessions in January and the other sessions starting in March because they're trying to assign where the bills go by leadership rather than having us do it in the session. So it's going to be a different way of doing things. And so we're going to have this challenge of having all these bills read and somebody, you know how we always get the copies of letters in front of us. And if it's going to be on emails, they'll be trying to put them with the bill and figuring out where they go. And all that's going to be a challenge. So I don't know if Yellow, you might have some idea with the university trying to help get that figured out. I don't know, but I'm just trying to reach out beforehand instead of finding out later that this isn't working.
All right, well,
Thanks, Senator Searway.
Yellow, you want to briefly do that? I don't want to go running over either. Go ahead. Yellow.
Yeah, it's 9:30. So I was going to say, Roger, if I can make a comment on Senator Searway. I mean, I think some of the committees I've had to work in have done a really good job of posting all that testimony on the committee, on each committee website. Maybe it's usually after the fact. So I don't know if they'll be more aggressive of trying to do it before the fact, you know, this time in this environment. But some seem really thorough at getting that testimony posted in one place, to your point. But I can't speak for the Ledge Council and Ledge staff. So I would think they're on this. And if not, you should make sure leadership makes sure they're on it. Roger, did you want to wrap anything substantively, and then I can quickly close us out?
Just 10 seconds. I know I speak on behalf of all the people who are here today. Just to say again, congratulations for getting where you are. I know how hard you worked to get there, and you are going to have the experience of your life. I think most people who serve in the legislature, when they're asked about the highlights of their life, their legislative service is right up there with almost anything else. So enjoy the ride. Thanks. Yellow?
Thanks so much, Roger. Thanks to Mike and Joyce.
We just lost you.
You're back on mute.
And I've been doing this all year. Roger, thank you so much for helping us put this together. And thanks to you, Mike, Joyce, Tori, and Craig. I really, honestly, I laughed, I cried. It was better than Cats. I hope that our attendees really appreciated it. And if you did, we'll certainly try to figure out how to get this link up on our website to the recording, and also inform the legislators at large that this recording is available. But if you appreciated it and got something from it, help us honor our presenters by making sure that others get a chance to watch and benefit from them. Thank you so much. It's restored a lot of my faith in the process, just hearing you guys talk about your service and your commitments. So as a citizen of Maine, again, I'm just one guy, but I thank you a lot. To the point that have been raised, we do have a session on budget, both the substance of what's in a typical state budget and how it works, but also the process of really difficult consensus building around budgets from legislators and practitioners coming up in January. Hope you join us next week and in January for more sessions. Look for those registration opportunities. Julie has put the survey response on your feedback on this session in the chat. If you open it up before exiting, you'll be taken right there even after we log off. So please give us feedback. And then finally, again, we couldn't do this without amazing hard work from Julie and Mike and amazing support from our partners, especially Maine Community Foundation and Maine Health Access Foundation. So thank you all for doing this and thank you all for participating. Have a great holiday season.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations. Have a great time.
Fun. Have fun. Always have fun.